Did you, who's going to pay the rent? How was that decided?
I was under the impression that it was on Steve. Steve was dealing with the rent portion of it. I had never done any negotiations about rent or agreed to pay anything.
And he was there until Steve Harrison was there, correct?
Yeah.
Till when?
Till we left.
Which
I got
was
some paperwork right here if you'd like to see it.
Let's take a look.
I did have a license at the time. I would make some receipts too, or I was printed out. I had paid the bill on behalf of them.
Dear, says Ms. Clark, please be advised that Antoinette Coombs has been residing in my rental home located at 13972 Marshall, Warren, Michigan since July 2009. The rent is $600 per month, but due to Ms. Combs' situation, I'm only charging her $400 per month. $400? This does not include utilities. As to date, Ms. Combs has outstanding rent due and owing the amount of $800. If you have any questions, please not hesitate to contact my officers. And then we have another letter dated to Steve Harrison from Mr. St. Pierre, dated June 8th of this year. Closed, you will find the demand for possession for non-payment of rent. My records show that you owe rent in the amount of $1,200 for May and June. If I am not paid the full amount within 7 days of this notice, I will begin eviction proceedings. If you have any further questions, do not hesitate to contact my office. And then I've got, it looks like a receipt from Mr. St. Pierre dated March 18th of this year. It says that he received from you $600 for March's rent. Why did you pay that?
I paid it on their behalf. I was the only person in my house with the license at the time, and I could make it down from Marshall to Mr. Pierre's office.
I've got a receipt from MoneyGram Payment Systems Incorporated, who was the drawer. It's hard to read this, for $100 dated March 18th of this year. And then another one, again, from MoneyGram Payment Systems Incorporated, dated March 18th of this year for $500. That's the $600 that you used to pay Mr. St. Pierre.
Yes.
All right. You need to sit back there.
Thank you.
Well, I guess, Mr. St. Pierre, the question I would ask is, how do I have a judgment for you, Mr. St. Pierre? I don't see the agreement between you and Mr. Davis.
Mr. Davis is an adult. Mr. Davis agreed to resided in my property.
Right.
Mr. Davis is jointly and severally liable along with Antoinette Combs and Steve Harrison. They, as he indicated, as he admits, he moved in just when Satina Harrison left. No dispute there, July of 2009. He knew that rent was $600. He put the utilities...
How do you know that? Did he say that to you? Did you have an agreement with him?
Oh, absolutely. He knew what rent was. That's why he came and paid it on March 18, 2010 of $600, as the court noted that he showed you a receipt for. He knew exactly what the rent was. He knew he was just responsible for it as Antoinette Combs and Steve Harrison. If that was the case, he resided there the entire time from beginning to end. And to say that, well, I didn't make the agreement, I was living there for free, and he knows, and we talked about it, I expected him that he was part of those three, that they're all responsible to pay rent. I couldn't have the minor pay rent. He's not old enough to make a contract. Steve Harrison, Antoinette Combs, and Kerry Davis all agreed to pay me a total of $600 and cover Satina Harrison's rent. They did make that agreement with me. They didn't pay. They owe far more than $3,000. I'm only asking for $3,000 for 5 months of unpaid rent during that particular time. They probably owe me over at least 8 months' rent, if not, but I can indicate to the court that I've put in my pleadings that I've only requested $3,000. I haven't even requested the water bill and all the demolishing and damages and problems they left me in regards to the property. $3,000 is very reasonable under the circumstances in regards to a demand. It does not even cover me for the rent that was not paid. I'm only asking for the rent that I've paid for, and because technically Antoinette Combs and Steve Harrison, and if he came here and said he wasn't there in July of 2009 and took over Satina Harrison's situation, or if he didn't stay to the very end, then maybe he'd have a defense. He lived there the entire time. He put the utilities in his name. I relied on that, and he indicated along with Antoinette Combs and Steve Harrison that they would pay me the $600 rent.
When's the last time you received rent?
It would have been on March 18th of 2010 when he paid it.
Mr. Davis, why did you put the utilities in your name? Well, first of all, did you do that?
Yeah, I put the bills in my name to try to help out as much as I could because they had outstanding bills. My mom's had a Social Security case pending that she just had to appeal. She hasn't worked this whole time since prior to us being here. And Steve agreeing upon the terms of doing work, because he does construction, for the rent was really the only basis of any type of agreement, because I wasn't working full-time. I could have never paid that. I could have never even went there with a clear conscience, because I would have never been able to pay the rent off the rip. That was never my money. If I dropped off the money, it was strictly me using my license to not put anybody else in jeopardy, the same as me putting the utilities in my name. I was just trying to help and pull and do what I could for the people that were giving me a free place to stay.
So what utilities did you have in your name?
I got we had cable, basic cable,
Okay.
we had the DTE, and the
Okay.
Consumers Energy.
But did you pay those utility bills while you were there?
As well as I could.
Well,
I would pay as much as I could afford to pay, whether I had a job or not, and then I would try to get DHS to pick up the rest. And sometimes we got shut off, and sometimes we didn't have heat, and sometimes we didn't have electricity, and those things happen. But basically, I assumed bills that I couldn't really pay for to try to help out.
just to help out. Were you asked to do that?
No, it was pretty much on my own free will.
On your own free will, you decided that you were going to be paying these bills?
I wasn't gonna, I mean, my mom and Steve found a house for us to stay at. They could leave the garage. I could stop living in my friend's basement. I had never had bills in my name prior to that, so I could open up new accounts with them and do my best to pay them, which is, it's not very responsible, but it was that or nothing.
What do you mean?
We would have been living in a house with no heat and no electricity, because they couldn't have got it turned on in their names. They have outstanding balances with those companies.
What type of damages were done to this house, Mr. St. Pierre? Do you have any pictures or anything about that? Or tell me about that.
No, I don't have pictures. When I went in, they tore the carpeting out of the living room. They're gonna work on the wood floor, so there's carpeting out of there. There was burns all over both carpetings in both bedrooms. I had to replace those, and I had to have the whole entire house painted, put a new floor in the kitchen, because literally the ceramic tile was, as it noted from the inspection, was never grouted. And when you don't grout ceramic tile, it just comes apart, and it literally came apart. Also, as the inspector noted, the sink was leaking, and it basically wiped out the bottom of the sink to where you could see literally the foundation, the dirt on the ground, and they just wouldn't repair it. They did absolutely nothing. I gave them a break and let them in without a security deposit. Shame on me, because obviously I took advantage of. When I tell you about the logs, and I'm not exaggerating, there had to be approximately 30 to 50 logs that had to be removed from their property that someone was doing something for firewood. And they left a tent in the backyard, and the grass, from this table, it had to be at least this high. You had to take a lawnmower through it in 3 different spots, 3 different opportunities in order to try to remove it. As they noted, the growth was so bad around the garage, it literally filled up whatever I was filling up to get it out of there, because they never bothered to cut the grass. They never bothered to trim the trees behind the garage or the bushes. And I did get poison ivy. And I had it all over my neck and arms. And it was just because the place was such a mess that all this had to be done. The water in the garage, that was just, generally there's a flooding problem because of neighbors, just a bad slope. And there was a lot of rain in this particular day, and that's the only reason why I don't blame them for the water in the garage. But everything else was just poor maintenance. As they indicated, they were responsible for all of the property from July 2009 to approximately when he indicated June of 2010. And you can look from the inspection report, and from what they did nothing to maintain it. They stuck me with all this, and so every floor had to be redone. They punched holes in the doors as well, and I just bought new doors so they could put them up. They put the new doors up after I bought them, then they punched holes in them, maybe just to get me back for letting them live there for so long without paying me rent, letting them live there for no security deposit, letting them live there so they wouldn't go homeless, and that's how they thanked me in return.
It doesn't sound like there's a written lease, written letter, written anything between these two people. So in my book, the defendant should win. But let's see what the judge says.
Well, it's a close case. The difficulty that you have in this case, Mr. St. Pierre, is there is no explicit agreement that you have with Mr. Davis regarding a landlord-tenant relationship. He's living there, obviously. It's property that you own. You do have a lease signed by somebody who does. Actually, no, you don't have a lease by someone who is living there at all. The only lease that you have signed with is Satina Harrison, who was not living there at the time. And normally, I think what I would do is dismiss a case brought by a landlord against a tenant who has no lease signed with that tenant unless there's an agreement between the tenant and the landlord for the tenant to live there and pay rent at a certain amount per month. And I would uphold that, but we don't even have that in this instance. There's apparently no explicit agreement between the parties in this case for the defendant to live at this premises and pay rent. But there's one thing that makes it different, and that is, Mr. Davis, you paid Mr. St. Pierre $600. And you apparently paid him, and that is the amount of rent for 1 month. I think it was for March that you paid that, if I remember the receipts, wasn't it?
March 18th, 2010.
March 18th.
I presented him with the money.
And what you did is you said that you were doing this trying to help out Steve Harrison, I believe.
This was strictly a legal thing because
What do you mean a legal thing? It's all legal.
my mother and Steve didn't have licenses. Steve still doesn't have a license. I made the trip in my vehicle with my valid license from 9 and Shaner up to Mr. St. Pierre's office in Mount Clemens to pay him.
Okay, but you still pay, if you were going to pay the rent that was owed or the debt that was owed by Mr. Harrison, you would have paid it to Mr. Harrison and he would have found a way to pay Mr. St. Pierre. If you really were living there, not without any agreement with Mr. St. Pierre, or at least not without some obligation in your mind that you had to pay Mr. St. Pierre, that's probably what would have happened. But it didn't happen that way. You paid Mr. St. Pierre directly, and you gave me a reason as to why you did that, but it makes it look as if you felt that you had some sort of obligation to pay rent in this case because you were living there. You were living there. And even though it's a close case, that is enough to tip it in Mr. St. Pierre's favor, I think, regarding rent in this case. And that is that there was an implied agreement that you had to pay rent in this case because you did pay Mr. St. Pierre the $600 for the 1 month. And that's the logical conclusion that I can draw from that. Had you not done that, I don't think I would be ruling in Mr. St. Pierre's favor. Because there's really no other evidence to indicate that there wasn't an agreement between the two of you. But that is significant that you paid him for that 1 month, and I think that that was enough to make you think that you had an obligation. So I will enter a judgment in favor of Mr. St. Pierre in this case in the amount of $3,000 because rent is $600 per month, and we've got certainly more than 6 months worth of unpaid rent since March.
Judge, that would be jointly and severally with the other two, because I can't have $9,000, and I
That's
wouldn't
right.
want to do that with him. So it's understood it's jointly and severally between the three.
That is correct.
I think
The court will add to that cost consisting of a $65 filing fee and a $27 service fee, bringing the total amount of the judgment to $3,092. Did you want to say something, Mr. Davis?
No, sir.
All right.
No, I disagree with the judge. There's no writings between these people. So let me see if I understand this. If you do a favor for a friend, then you're obligated for that friend's debt, like your friend's rent? I'm not sure. But again, I'm not the judge. Bottom line, make sure you know who your friends are and what you get involved with. If you find that you are involved in a dispute that you can't resolve, small claims court may be the answer. Thanks for watching Case Closed. I'm Charlie White.